Imagine waking up in a world where your family doesn't just own a company, they own the country. Your phone, your TV, your hospital, your insurance, even the apartment building you live in. All of it stamped with the same logo. 3 stars, Samsung. This isn't science fiction. This is South Korea. And at the center of it all stands one family, the Lees. 3 generations of men who built an empire so powerful that it doesn't just influence the economy, it is the economy. But behind the gleaming skyscrapers and cutting-edge technology lies a darker story of bribery, scandal, and a grip on power so tight that even prison cells couldn't break it. Before Samsung became synonymous with smartphones and semiconductors, it was nothing more than a small trading company in 1938 Busan. The founder, Lee Byung-chul, wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He was the 3rd son of a modest landowner in a Korea that wasn't even free, a country crushed under Japanese colonial rule. His father wanted him to run the family rice mill, to stay small, to stay safe. But Lee Byung-chul had other plans. He packed his bags and left for Tokyo, returning years later with borrowed money and audacious dreams. In 1938, he opened a trading company that sold noodles, sugar, and dried fish. He called it Samsung, 3 stars, a name meant to symbolize something eternal, something that would outlast empires and wars. And wars came. World War II, Liberation, Civil War. Korea was torn apart, rebuilt, and torn apart again. But where others saw only chaos, Lee Byung-chul saw opportunity. He bet everything on industry, textiles, insurance, construction. Then he did something radical. He bought machines and started making Korean products for Koreans. In a nation flooded with Japanese imports, this was nearly revolutionary. People were desperate for something of their own, something that belonged to them. And as Korea rose from the ashes of war, Samsung rose with it. But rising too fast attracts enemies, especially when your empire begins to threaten the government itself. By the early 1960s, Samsung was already one of the most recognized names in South Korea. But everything changed on May 16, 1961. Military General Park Chung-hee led a bloodless coup, overthrowing the fragile democratic government. Tanks rolled into Seoul. The constitution suspended. Park promised stability and reform, but what he really wanted was total domination. For Lee Byung-chul, this was a defining moment. He had a choice: resist and risk losing everything, or adapt and become part of Park's vision. The decision was made for him. Just months after the coup, the new regime seized Samsung's bank. Accusing Lee of embezzlement and bribery, his reputation crumbled overnight. Was Samsung corrupt from the start? But the truth was simpler. This was a warning shot. Park's message was clear: align with the state or face extinction. Lee got the message. He didn't fight back. Instead, he played the long game. Publicly, he apologized and resigned. Privately, he began aligning himself with Park's economic ambitions. In return, the regime handed Samsung generous government loans, favorable import licenses, and exclusive infrastructure projects. This unspoken deal between Samsung and the regime would change South Korea forever. Park's government launched an ambitious plan to industrialize the nation fast, but it needed partners, reliable, powerful conglomerates that could build, produce, export. Samsung became one of Park's most loyal tools. Between 1962 and 1966, Samsung expanded aggressively: textiles, food processing, logistics, insurance. With government backing, it secured cheap foreign loans, state-owned land, and preferential tariffs that crushed smaller competitors. By 1969, Samsung made its most audacious move yet. It entered the electronics industry. Samsung's first product, a humble black and white TV, sold out instantly. Behind the scenes, Lee Byung-chul wasn't just building factories, he was building relationships with generals, ministers, party leaders. The man who had once been Korea's richest independent businessman had now become something else entirely: a government-aligned kingmaker. The year was 1987. South Korea was boiling with political protests, teetering on the edge of democracy. And amid the chaos, a quiet but monumental succession took place. Lee Byung-chul, the founder of Samsung, had died, and into his seat stepped his third son, Lee Kun-hee. At first glance, he didn't look like an emperor, soft-spoken, introverted, obsessed with horses and Japanese art films. But behind closed doors, Lee Kun-hee was ruthless. He saw something others didn't. Samsung, despite its size and power in Korea, was laughable on the world stage. In 1993, during a business retreat in Frankfurt, Germany, Lee Kun-hee stunned his top executives with a single command: change everything except your wife and children. This wasn't a metaphor. Samsung products at the time were considered cheap, copycat electronics. But Lee wanted to build something world-class, something iconic, and he was willing to destroy everything his father built to achieve it. The Frankfurt Declaration became legend. From that moment on, everything changed. Factories were shut down, entire divisions dismantled. When 150,000 Samsung phones were found defective, Lee Kun-hee ordered them all to be burned publicly. Millions of dollars up in flames. It wasn't about the money, it was about the message. Samsung would never again be second-rate. What followed was one of the most aggressive business turnarounds in modern history. Samsung poured billions into R&D. Lee redirected the company toward semiconductors, displays, and mobile devices. By the early 2000s, Samsung wasn't just Korean, it was global. Its TV won design awards. Its phones went toe-to-toe with the iPhone. Its chips powered the very devices of its rivals. Let that sink in. The competitor depended on the enemy. But Lee Kun-hee maintained absolute control. Through a maze of cross-shareholdings between dozens of affiliate companies, Samsung wasn't a business, it was a kingdom, and Lee Kun-hee was its emperor. But every empire has its shadow. You've made it this far, which means you're hooked. But this is just the beginning. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories about the families who secretly control the world. By the late 2000s, Samsung was everywhere, in your living room, in your pocket, in your office. But back home in Korea, Lee Kun-hee was being watched. In 2007, a bombshell. A former Samsung lawyer went public with explosive allegations. He claimed Samsung had built a secret slush fund worth hundreds of millions, used to bribe judges, prosecutors, and politicians. Samsung, he said, wasn't a company, it was a shadow government. In April 2008, Lee Kun-hee was indicted, tax evasion, breach of trust. He bowed publicly on national television, admitting some wrongdoing. Then he resigned. After 20 years at the helm, the man who built the empire stepped down. It looked like the end. But in 2009, Lee Kun-hee was convicted, only fined, and given a suspended sentence. He didn't serve a single day in prison. And then the twist. Just a year later, South Korea was chosen to host the Winter Olympics. The government needed Samsung's help. Lee Kun-hee was pardoned. The reason? National interest. Samsung was too big to fail, and Lee Kun-hee too powerful to jail. Fast forward to 2017, South Korea, chaos again. The president impeached, protesters flooding the streets with candles. And at the center of the scandal, Samsung. Prosecutors claim that Lee Jae-yong, Lee Kun-hee's only son, authorized $38 million in bribes for political favors. January 2017, he's arrested. The prince who once smiled from conference stages, now photographed in a prison jumpsuit. August 2017, found guilty. Sentence, 5 years. But just 6 months later, an appeals court reduced the sentence, suspended the rest. He walked free after serving 353 days. And then in 2020, history repeated itself. New charges, accounting fraud, market manipulation. January 2021, convicted again, sentenced to 2.5 years. August 2022, pardoned again. The logic: Samsung was too important to Korea's economy. The prince walked free, untouchable. Samsung isn't just a company, it's a mirror, reflecting South Korea's ambition, its contradictions, its compromises. 3 generations of Lee men built an empire that controls nearly 20% of the nation's GDP. They survived wars, coups, trials, prison. Convicted, pardoned, returned to power. Because in South Korea, Samsung isn't just too big to fail, it's too powerful to touch. The question isn't whether the Lee family will continue to rule. The question is at what cost? And who really controls whom? Does the family control the nation, or does the nation's dependents control the family? Like, share, and comment. Do you think the Lee family will ever lose their grip on Samsung? Or will they control South Korea forever?